joining us in a special extended, as I said, extended 5 minutes, and she'll talk to us about the National Archives Board of Trade Registered Designs. But just to give you a bit of background to Olivia in her own right, Olivia is a visual collections record specialist, which is quite a mouthful of a job title name, at the National Archives of the United Kingdom. She specialises in 19th and 20th century design histories, working with an emphasis on records of registered designs. Prior to joining the National Archives, she worked at the Royal School of Needlework and gained an MA in History of Design from the Royal College of Art at the Royal College of Art and the Victoria and Albert Museum, that special kind of joint shared course. So Olivia, I am looking forward to seeing what treasures you have to share with us.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm just going to share my screen. And you're right, yes, it is a big mouthful, that job title. I try and avoid it as much as possible, so it's great to actually have someone else say it.
They like to give people long job titles, I swear, so they can add more duties into the role.
Okay, so can you see my slides?
Yeah, we can. Just so everyone, so you know, we did try to get Olivia's slides full screen, but this was the best compromise we could come up with. So we know they're not full screen, but you do see some treasures nevertheless.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. It's absolutely wonderful to be here and have the chance to speak to you about this vast, unwieldy, but also fascinating collection known as registered designs. So first of all, I'd like to start by introducing the National Archives. You can see the building here, which some of you may be familiar with already. It's based in Kew in southwest London. It's the official archive to the UK government and for England and Wales. It's the guardian of over 1,000 years of historical records, which comprise around 11 million documents stored on around 170 kilometres of shelving. So a lot of stuff. So due to the official nature of the records we care for, we don't tend to be the first place people think to come to for records of art and design. The National Archives is better known as the place of deposit for things like the Domesday Book or Shakespeare's Will or census records, but not so much for 19th century textiles and dress. And yet we hold a very large and concentrated collection of historical design records in the form of registered designs. So registered designs are records of intellectual property. They were created in the process of people protecting the copyright of their designs. There tends to be a little bit more familiarity with the system of patents of invention, but design registration was a separate system used to protect the appearance of a design rather than the function. And this system was administered by the Board of Trade and later the Patent Office, and that explains broadly why the records that were created have come to be held in a government archive. At the National Archives, we hold around 3 million records of these registered designs, starting in 1839 and running all the way up to 1991. Textiles are very well represented in this collection. We estimate that around a third of the total registered design records are for textiles. And each design comes with a visual and a corresponding written record of the registration details. So I should say today that I'm focusing on designs related to textiles and dress, which is what you'll see in my slides, but there are designs for all different types of objects, some that you didn't even know existed before you'd looked in a design register. So here's an early example of one of the designs in the collection. This is a registered design for a coat by Charles Cook. I don't know anything about him. If anyone does, please get in touch. His address is given as 246 Regent Street, London. And you can see the illustration for the coat, which was known as a representation and was used to show what protection was being sought for. The registration was made on the 7th of October, 1841. And you can see straight away that one of the strengths of the collection is the possibility to use these details for dating dress and textiles. So that's one design, which is something you would find in one of these enormous volumes, which is what the 19th century records look like. So when a design was registered, a copy was submitted to the designs office. That was the representation. And the purpose of this was to keep a record of what had been registered, to allow searchers in the office to check if something similar had already come in. And also these volumes were able to be consulted by the public for a fee. If you open up one of these volumes, you'd see something like this. The copies of the designs or the representations were pasted onto the pages by staff in the office. The volume on the left here shows printed fabric samples, all registered by, in this instance, by a John Monteith at Glasgow in 1850. The representations were recorded chronologically in order of date of registration, which means by opening up one of these volumes and leafing through, you can get a real sense of what kinds of styles were popular at one particular time or over a period of time, which is obviously a great avenue for research. So the Monteith designs were quite uniform, but there are also many volumes like the one on the right where the representations are arranged a little bit more chaotically, and I'd actually say that's probably more typical of these records. Each design was stamped with its own design number, and you can sometimes find additional notes. There are some here about how long the copyright was in place for. So representations could be submitted in any format. So there's a huge mix of drawings, photographs, physical samples, particularly for textile samples, paper patterns, and quite often for fashion accessories, made up examples. So on the right hand side, you can see that's an actual leather glove that's been pasted into the volume and flattened over years of use. While the general chaos of these records does spark some joy, the representation volumes can also be very challenging to work with, and it does create some access issues. So the volumes that I just showed you, they're extremely heavy. The heaviest volume in the collection weighs around 25 kilograms and can be quite difficult to handle. So the other aspect to this challenge is the way the designs were inserted. They're working documents that can make them very unwieldy, and due to the conditions they were kept in during their working life, some are in very poor condition and are very fragile. So alongside the highly visual representation volumes, there are the corresponding registers. So this is where the details of the proprietor registering a design were recorded. So for each individual design, these give us the proprietor's name, which can be the name of a company or an individual, their address, and the date of the registration. And there's sometimes a very brief description of the design, but, and particularly for textiles, these can be very vague. So for example, printed fabric without any kind of description of the print. So you would need to consult the visual record to find out what it was. So far, I've slightly avoided talking too much about design copyright legislation, just not really one of my strengths, but I briefly would like to touch on just how this system of design registration came to be in the first place, because it is in fact inherently tied into the history of textiles and particularly the industrialisation of textile production in Britain. So while the records of registered designs at the National Archives begin in 1839, lobbying for copyright protection for textiles specifically started in the 18th century, and the first Calico Printers Act was passed in 1787. With the rise in machine manufactured textiles and the lifting of the ban on imported cottons, British manufacturers had realised a need to protect their designs from piracy. However, there were arguments both for and against copyright protection in the textile industry. One of the arguments for those who favoured a registration system was that copying was detrimental to business, but that it was also morally bankrupt. And some firms who were copying designs were labelled as disreputable. The opposing argument came from manufacturers who said copying was an integral part of the design practice in textile production. Particularly, it's been said that northern textile firms opposed the early act in 1787, saying they relied on the copying of London patterns to keep up with fashion trends. However, first iterations of that act were successful, and it was renewed annually from 1789. In 1794, it was made permanent and extended protection to 3 months. So they applied to linen, cotton, calico, and muslins, i.e. textiles made from vegetable fibres. There are no records of the designs registered in this period, and certainly not at the National Archives, as the protection was granted upon publication, as opposed to this system of submitting copies to the registry. Meanwhile, a huge proliferation in the production of consumer goods, not just textiles, generated discussions around the quality of designs produced in Britain, as opposed to those overseas, eventually resulting in a select committee being set up in 1835 to inquire into the best means of extending a knowledge of the arts and principles of design among the people of this country. So the committee sat for 2 sessions, and the 2 key outcomes of this were the establishment of the Government School of Design, later the Royal College of Art, and a copyright system for all ornamental designs, not just textiles. The committee hopes that by encouraging people to invest in their designs in this way, manufacturers would aim for higher quality. So I think I might be running out of time here, so I think I might
You're fine for time, Olivia. If you want it, you're fine for time. Don't worry.
Oh, really? Okay.
When people are sharing lovely things, we're not forceful timekeepers.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I could go on forever, really, and there's probably many things I'm not going to be able to cover here, but I will just give you this reading list because I think there's so much more to say, of course, about design copyright legislation that I can't do justice to. So here's a list of some really good articles and chapters and books that address this. I really recommend checking those out if you are interested in this topic. So I'll continue a little bit. The design copyright legislation came into force for all designs, not just textiles, in 1839 with the Copyright of Designs Act. And this allowed anyone with an ornamental design to protect their design through the designs registry system. And as said, or maybe I didn't say this, but actually not the vegetable fibre textiles were excluded because there was existing legislation for those in place. But they did extend to some other types of textiles and clothing and garments too. So here's an example of a design for a metal button and brace roller that was registered in 1841, and a design for a pattern for a carpet from a Kidderminster-based manufacturer. Now, when this act was in place, the legislation was really in its early stages, and a huge reform of the system came into play in 1842 with the 1842 Ornamental Designs Act. And the key change that this legislation brought about was the introduction of a classification system. And this allowed designs to be registered under a series of 30, sorry, I've actually got 12 written twice there, but 13 classifications according to materials. And as you can see here, textiles and textile products are very well represented. And this affected the records in the sense that all of those designs for those material classifications were stored together. So here are some images of volumes representing printed fabrics for furnitures and for woven fabrics. Again, you get that sense of what was popular at the time leafing through, and you also get a sense of just how prolific some of these manufacturers were. And one of the really interesting series, one of my favourite aspects of the collection is the Class 13 Lace and Miscellanea volumes. So designs at this time for clothing, there was no specific class for clothing designs. So they tended to be registered under Lace and Miscellanea, and there was a huge rise in registrations for clothing at this time. So of course it coincided with the mass manufactured clothing industry, and here we have those designs very well represented. So a lot of non-elite clothing styles are really well represented in these records. You get things like knitted socks, and you also get a lot of things like braids and elements of haberdashery, of course lots of lace as well. So it can be just a really great collection for looking at the kind of the minutiae of dress, which sometimes has been lost through history in other collections. I'm just going to speak very briefly about how these designs are accessed. So the National Archives has a sort of self-service document system. So all records are accessed through our online catalogue known as Discovery by searching for document references. The good news about 19th century dress and textiles in the registered designs is that from 1839 to 1884, all of the designs have been transcribed through a volunteer cataloguing project, and those details have been entered into the catalogue. So they're all name searchable. So you can search by name of manufacturer proprietor, and you can search by address, you can search by type of design as well. So they're fairly easy to access. One key thing to mention is that none of these have been digitized at scale. However, from 1885 onwards, this hasn't been done, and they are a little bit more difficult to find. We do have an online research guide, which I really recommend checking out if you're interested in exploring this collection more. That can be accessed on our website, and the link's there, or I can put that in the chat for anyone who wants that. So yeah, thank you so much for listening. And just to add that I'd be so interested in hearing from anybody who's worked with this collection. That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. That was amazing. Oh my gosh, so much. I kept trying not to put too many comments in the chat because I was thinking, oh, maybe this is where all the odd socks go and silly things like that. But just such a wealth of inspiration there. Kate, have we got some questions in the chat that you'd like to?
Yes, we have. Lots of chat about that first jacket, just those connections, design connections. Interesting, isn't it? The Charles Cook looked so much like a deal kind of 100 years previously to that. Sheila would like to know, what date is the heaviest volume from? Is that something you're able to answer?
Oh, I couldn't really pinpoint that exactly, but we do know that the particularly heavy volumes are the ones that, well, they actually represent something I didn't have a chance to talk about here, but another act that was brought in, sorry about all the acts, but 1843, there was an act called the Utility Designs Act, which allowed people to register things that weren't purely ornamental, but had some kind of function. And those volumes in particular, we're not actually sure why, but they are incredibly heavy. I think maybe they were just trying to pack more in, but yeah, unlike some of the more quirky designs I've shown, they don't contain physical samples. So really off the top of my head, I can't really give you a reason why they would be heavier, but they are. You did answer, you talked about access. I was going to ask about how searchable the volumes are in terms of the digital access, and also Rosalind is asking similar, having been to the National Archives and accessed the Board of Trade records, the easy and most exciting part is seeing the view and viewing the visual records. The hardest part is searching through the written records to find what you need. So so I guess it's just a very unwieldy beast, isn't it, to try and make that searchable. Yeah, it can be. We do have cataloguing projects in the pipeline to improve access to those designs from 1885 onwards. There's also another finding aid that I can sort of highlight and also share details of. It's also included in another cataloguing project we're working on currently, but it's the official Journal of the Patents Office, which was the sort of corresponding publication that you can use to find designs from that period where searchability in the catalogue is not so good. So they would publish, they would print the details of designs registered week by week, and you can find designs in that way. That's one inroad in where it becomes a little bit more challenging in terms of our access.
Lots of comments in the chat about so interesting, really useful, really fascinating. Debbie saying fascinating, you could lose yourself through this collection. Veronica's included the link on how to access the registered designs, the National Archive link.
Oh, thank you.
And Hillary's also put the links onto Twitter as well, so anybody who wants to check that out. So is it this, are you able to actually with different, when you come to the National Archive, you can see documents, can you actually have these volumes and leaf through them? Is that part that they are?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like at first hand, you can.
That is our USP.
I think it just shows how. So one of your slides showed Thompson Brothers in Clitheroe, and I've got some of those swatches in the dress diary that I'm working on, and it's just seeing. I would never have thought to look at that particular archive. So I mean, I found that particularly fascinating. Veronica's. Just wondering, she's saying I'd be interested to learn how or if it's possible to digitize design at scale. How big do they get?
Oh, I'd say the largest, well, actually, it's really impossible to say, so I haven't seen, probably
that is fine. I was just wondering Because it sounded like such a logical thing to do, but not something I would have thought of doing. Is just thinking we need, when we digitize them, it's not just an image, it's like what's the scale of the pattern repeat and stuff like that. And that's just me going, oh, this is literally going, what methodology would you require for that? And like, how is that even possible? So I didn't know if you'd started to trial stuff to achieve that, or it's just something that's like on the wish list for the future.
It is on the wish list. It is very difficult. I know that discussions in the past have, involved a lot around how do you capture that kind of amazing like materiality and the tactility of the collection. And the sort of excitement of discovering things as you turn pages. With some of the designs that have been scanned for various purposes, although just to say again, they've not been made widely available. You do lose quite a lot of the sort of like the texture of some of these designs. They're all, like I said, they're quite chaotic, and some of that joy is really in seeing the original. But yeah, of course, to make them much more easy to access, it would be great to digitize them. In answer to your question, I really don't know what the largest is. I mean, in terms of the volume, I think I've seen one. I think some of the largest of those are about 1 meter by 1 meter. But then within those, there are textiles that are folded up, so you just never know what you're going to get. Really, they're quite amazing, but unwieldy.
Yeah. Kim's saying, does it tend to only be mainstream and commercial designers registered, or are smaller firms and dressmakers also represented?
Yeah, many smaller firms and dressmakers registered. We actually don't know too much about why people have chosen to register and why people have chosen not to. Some in relation to some of the arguments that I mentioned about, the for and against for the introduction of design registration in the first place. Actually, it turned out through studies, I think David Graysmith has done a really good study on this, that some of the firms that were lobbying for protection ended up not registering anything. So it's kind of unclear who actually used the system and why they chose to interact with it. Something we do want to do a lot more work into looking into. But absolutely, small scale manufacturers are represented, sometimes individuals, and it can be quite fun to corroborate with census data to find out a little bit more about those. So I think it's a really good research opportunity to put those two records together. Yeah.
Amazing. Hillary's just saying that it includes everyday textiles in good condition is such an amazing resource, and she's keen to look for comparison with mid-19th century burial and funeral textiles, which would be amazing. Mackenzie's just made the comment that how important it is to have the scale, or at least a ruler to give an idea, because scale is obviously really important in reproduction. Sheila would like to know how many registrants pursued breaches of copyright. Is there any way to trace this in the National Archives records?
Oh, that's a good question. Breaches of copyright, yeah. Yes, possibly in our legal records, of which I'm not a specialist.
Kind of cross-pollination. Yeah, that would take
design history only, please. But absolutely, that's very relevant, and probably should know the answer to that.
Right.
But
possibly a bit different.
Trying to think. Haven't looked at intellectual property challenges in any details. So I'm not really sure, and I can't answer your question right now. But if you wanted to get in touch, please do, and I can try and put you in touch with someone in our legal team who'll definitely have the answer.
Fantastic, thank you so much. How interesting. Robin is asking, do textile designs have the same copyright expirations as other images, and have you worked with anyone who reproduced these?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, sure. Robin's just asking, do textile designs have the same copyright expirations as other images, and have you worked with anyone who reproduced these?
So is that question related to, I think, maybe like modern copyright?
Yeah, I guess so. In the way that pictures have like a 70-year images expiration in terms of copyright, does the same apply to these kinds of images? So could someone come along and say, oh, I like that chintz, I'm going to reproduce it?
Yeah, as far as I know, I mean, most of the designs are out of copyright, but then there is some kind of vagueness around firms like William Morris, which has been, reproduced kind of endlessly, and we do have, quite a few Morris designs in our collection. I haven't worked with anyone who's looked to reproduce designs in our records, but yeah, it is a really good question. But sometimes, yes, modern copyright questions also very much elude me, I'm afraid. And in this collection, there are a lot of layers to it, because of course they are intellectual property records already, and then you're talking about the production of those. Yeah.
So one final question came up.
Yes, final question. What's from Anna? What's the oddest thing you've seen in the volumes? What's the thing that you turned and went, oh?
Yeah, there's one day I opened a volume and saw something that looked quite a lot like hair. And there is actually a lot of hair. I've subsequently found quite a lot of hair-based designs. But this one was a bit creepy, actually, because it was some white hair, white fleece, as it turned out to be, they were calling it Baybazar fleece, which I believe is a type of, I'm going to get this completely wrong now, is it Angora or some kind of goat-based fleece? Yeah. And somebody was registering this as a design, which seems kind of absurd, actually, trying to register it as a sort of natural material like that. But yeah, it turns out they were a wig manufacturer that was from the 1840s. So it would have been used in wigs. It was supposed to have a hair-like quality to it.
Amazing, thank you so much.
Brilliant. Oh, thank you. What a wonderful thing to end on. Wigs. I know Jenny Tiromani is always trying to find out more about what wigs were made out of.